Okay, so welcome everybody. And we're going to be talking about compassion tonight, which is one of my favorite subjects, and how we can use compassion as a healing tool, a tool to support ourselves and our well-being and help us when we live with illness and suffering. So many of you know, I'm sure, who I am, but I'm a naturopathic health coach, and I'm also a mindfulness teacher and psychotherapist and integral eye movement therapy practitioner. And I use compassion for myself. I live with MCAS and Lyme disease and dysautonomia. So I use compassion for myself to help me cope with my illnesses. And it's been hugely helpful for me, which is why I'm such a big advocate for people to learn about compassion techniques and how to use them for themselves. And I use them a lot with my clients and with my mindfulness practice as well. So just to say that obviously this isn't medical advice. I don't know your individual personal circumstances, so it's for information and educational purposes only. And we can't, know exactly what you need and if this is the right thing for you. And generally these practices like mindfulness and self-compassion work, they are helpful and they are safe for everybody. But if you have a lot of emotional distress and a lot of trauma in your life, then it may not be the right thing for you to do. And it would be good to seek some advice from somebody before you start doing a lot of these practices, because they do involve sitting with ourselves, sitting with our difficulties, and that can be overwhelming. And it's good to do it with the support of a practitioner if you are experiencing a lot of distress or trauma. So I'm going to suggest that people pop in the chat. When I say the word compassion, what do you understand by that? What does it mean for you? And what do you think compassion means? What do you think it's all about? If people want to pop that in the chat, it would be interesting to get your ideas. Understanding, yeah, kindness and empathy. Yeah, all of these lovely qualities of being kind, basically. And that's part of it. Yeah, love for ourselves. That's a lovely one. Yes. Kindness and empathy for yourself and others, caring. Yeah, absolutely. And all of those things definitely are encompassed within compassion, and they're part of it. And it's a particular way of using those feelings, those good qualities to help ourselves when we experience suffering and difficulty. Because compassion, the technical definition, I should say, is that compassion is a response to suffering. So in order for us to elicit compassion and to feel compassion and to be compassionate, we have to be confronted with something that is a form of suffering, either in ourselves or in somebody else. So unlike other emotions like kindness and caring and friendship and love, compassion is inextricably connected with suffering. They're two sides of the same coin, because compassion is always a response to suffering. That's what makes compassion different from empathy and kindness and caring. They're all part of it, but compassion is specifically a response to suffering. So in order to understand compassion, really, we have to first of all understand suffering and what suffering is, in order to be able to understand what its opposite is and what compassion means. So suffering is the difference, it's the gap, if you like, between what we hoped for, what we wanted to happen, what we were expecting to happen, and the actual reality of what we're facing, what has happened, and what we are experiencing. Or sometimes it's the perception we have of what is happening. So, for example, we might think everyone hates us. That might not be the truth, but we perceive that to be the truth. And then there's a gap because we want to be liked. We perceive everybody dislikes us. The gap is the suffering. So, in order for there to be suffering, there needs to be a gap, this difference. And, there can be all sorts of things. We want to work in our job. We love our job and we want to be financially secure and we want to keep our job, but we lose our job. We're made redundant and we find ourselves unemployed. The suffering comes from the gap, the difference between those two things, what we wanted to happen, what we expected to happen, and the reality that we're experiencing of redundancy and unemployment. Similarly, for us, we didn't want to be unwell. We didn't ask to be unwell. We imagined a life for ourselves that was filled with all sorts of things that were not connected to being unwell, but we find ourselves in the reality that we are living with an illness. So there's a gap there, there's a difference, and it's that difference that causes us the emotional distress that we call suffering. We don't want to be in pain. Nobody wants to be in pain. All human beings want to live a comfortable life, but we find ourselves experiencing sensations which are uncomfortable and painful and distressing. And we didn't want that to happen. We didn't want that to be part of our reality. It's not the life that we hoped for. It's not the physical experience that we wanted. And so there is a gap. And it's the gap between what we hoped for and what's happening now in our reality that causes that distress. And suffering is innate to human experience. All people suffer in some way. It's an inevitable part of human experience because nothing ever works out perfectly for everybody, for anybody. Things that we don't want to happen will inevitably happen to us all at some point in our lives. We will all experience some degree of suffering, whether that is redundancy and job loss and financial insecurity, or whether that is bereavement and the loss of a loved one or a pet, or whether that is divorce, a relationship breakup, or all sorts of things happen on trivial scale, small things on a daily basis. We don't want our car to break down, and it does. We don't want the printer to pack up, and it does. We don't want our house move to fall through, and it does. There's a gap, there's a difference between what we were wanting and what we got in reality on a day-to-day basis. And then there's those big things that happen to us, like illness, that change our lives enormously and mean that our life is different from what we hoped for. And generally speaking, human beings are programmed to avoid suffering. It's a natural human survival instinct response that we don't want suffering because the body and the brain perceives that as being a potential threat. And so we're programmed to avoid suffering at all costs. And that causes conflict because we try and push it away, we try and pretend it's not happening, we try and avoid it at all costs, we go out of our way to avoid anything that we perceive to be distressing, and it becomes a taboo. People generally don't want to acknowledge suffering, they don't want to look it in the eye, they don't want to admit that it happens, because if it can happen to other people, it might happen to me, and that's distressing. So suffering generally in our society has a little bit of a taboo quality to it because people generally don't want to suffer. And we run away from that. We push the suffering away. We fight against it. We don't want it to happen. We refuse to acknowledge it. We pretend it's not there. We try and fight it. We try and fix it. And the more we do that, the more painful it becomes, because then there's an additional conflict that's happening as well as the original distress. And it becomes something shameful, something to be hidden, something to not be talked about, because we we don't want to be the person that everybody thinks of as suffering in some way. We want to be a person that, lives a great life, is doing the great job, is being successful, is being rich, is happily married, is healthy and fit. We don't want to be perceived in some way as suffering because of this societal shame that is attached to it, and people don't want to acknowledge it. And all of that makes the suffering worse. It adds to the suffering and makes us feel even worse when we suddenly find that we are suffering and we are in this position. And so by refusing to acknowledge the suffering, to trying to push it away, to fight against it, we actually make the suffering more painful. And in society generally, suffering is sort of framed in our psychological landscape as being something that should not be happening. This shouldn't be happening to me. This is a wrong thing. Life shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't be this way. And actually, that is completely untrue, because the reality is that everyone suffers. Suffering is normal. It's something that happens to everybody. It's a universal human experience that we all experience. And by creating this kind of taboo around it, by making it into something difficult and shameful and abnormal, we make suffering worse, because then people are alone in their suffering. They feel isolated, they feel disconnected, and people feel as though they have to keep their suffering to themselves and suffer in silence. They can't talk about it, they can't admit to suffering. And if they try to talk about it and admit to suffering, other people don't want to know, because that's awkward and uncomfortable and difficult. And so there's this whole additional layer of taboo and shame that as a society we've built around suffering because of our inability to acknowledge it and to our desire to avoid it and push it away. So in Buddhism, they have this amazing concept which really helps me and which I try and apply in my own life as much as possible, because none of this is easy. But the concept of the two arrows. So in Buddhism, they believe that the first arrow, that is difficult, painful experiences, suffering, the difference between what we wanted and what happens, that experiences that we didn't ask for that happen to us, that's inevitable. Everybody will suffer in our lives. That first arrow will land at some point, whether that's redundancy or divorce or illness or bereavement. There will be at least one arrow that lands at some point. And that's really normal because it happens to everyone. However, there's a second arrow which we fire into ourselves by resisting that initial suffering, by fighting against it, by not wanting it to be happening, by trying to make it something that it isn't, by turning away from it, pushing it away, fighting against it, being ashamed of it, feeling shame, feeling embarrassment, feeling guilt, feeling fear, worrying about the situation. All of those things create a second arrow of suffering that we fire into ourselves. And we have a degree of choice and control about whether we suffer that second arrow. And a lot of how we respond to difficulty, a lot of the distress that we feel comes from how we respond to that initial arrow, the difficulty that lands in our life, how we respond to that, and whether we fire that second arrow into ourselves. And that is something that we can have a little bit of exploration of. We can play with that a little bit and see if there's a little bit of choice, a little bit of control there that we can exercise to make suffering less distressing for ourselves. And particularly relating to chronic illness, this whole issue is an additional layer, because it's not just a physical issue, as we all know, because society rewards productivity and pushing through, and we have all of this societal pressure to achieve, and we have certain standards in society that people, promote. And generally society shies away from suffering. They don't want to talk about suffering. It's this taboo. That then creates additional shame and grief and frustration and isolation and guilt, which for us creates this additional layer of distress on top of the physical and mental and emotional toll as well. And that affects our physical ability to heal, to be well, to improve our health, because it changes our bodies chemically, physiologically. It changes the way our bodies are working to be in that state of distress. It changes our nervous system from being in the parasympathetic and rest and digest. We get stuck in that fight or flight, and it changes our sense of identity and our sense of self-worth. So that adds another layer of suffering. So on the other side of that coin, then, we have compassion. And we talked a little bit about what is compassion, and it's quite often described as empathy plus action. So empathy on its own is feeling distress for someone else. We feel sad for them, and we feel the emotion with them. But compassion takes it one step further. Compassion is an active process. So beyond just feeling distress at their distress or our distress, there is a desire to do something, to take action in order to alleviate that suffering in some way. So we move beyond the feeling of just empathy, of feeling sad for someone, into a state of active processing of what can we do to alleviate the suffering. And it's very interesting that studies have shown that when we feel empathy, when we have that ability to feel and understand people's emotions and their suffering, when we respond to that, it activates parts of our brains that are involved in our own emotional distress and pain and negative feelings. So these areas of the brain that are associated with our own trauma get lit up by feeling empathy for someone else's distress. So we literally feel their pain. And if we're not careful, we can get stuck in that state of distress. And so now we're both distressed. And that can cause us to then feel trauma. And this is how people who are in caring professions get emotional burnout, because we're just in the state of empathy where we're just feeling that emotion, which is lighting up our own emotional distress buttons, if you like. Whereas compassion, when people experience compassion, they feel that empathy and they feel concerned, and then they turn it into an action of being motivated to help, to alleviate the suffering, to do something. It activates different parts of the brain. It activates parts of the brain that are associated with positive emotions, feeling safe, feeling connected, and in a state of well-being. So this is the difference between empathy and compassion. And compassion is a more healthy approach because it's not activating our trauma response in the same way, or rather we're not stuck in that trauma response. We feel it, we feel their distress, but then we move past it into action to alleviate the suffering. And there's lots of studies now that show that compassion and having this active aspect to compassion is helpful for us in lots of ways. So there have been studies that show that it reduces our stress hormones, lowers our cortisol levels. So that in turn can help with reducing inflammation and immune system dysregulation, because we are reducing that fight or flight cycle and moving more into the parasympathetic. It's been shown to boost our oxytocin. So remember those areas of the brain that are associated with feeling connected, that is all tied up with oxytocin, our bonding hormone, which elicits feelings within us of trust and warmth, and reduces that fight or flight again, because we can't be in that state of being happy and connected and in fear and panic. So we elicit that oxytocin production, and oxytocin is a very beneficial chemical in our body that helps our body to be in a more healthy state, into that rest and digest state. When we experience this active compassion, as we've said, it engages the parasympathetic nervous system. Some studies there showing that it increases our heart rate variability, which is a good indicator of our vagal tone and whether we have a good functioning nervous system, and increased measure of vagal tone there with the respiratory sinus arrhythmia as well. So studies showing that it engages our parasympathetic state, whereas the empathy can leave us stuck in the fight or flight because we're feeling their pain and their trauma. Moving into compassion activates the parasympathetic. And studies have also shown here that it can help us to reduce depression and anxiety and difficult emotions, and also criticism, that inner critic, that voice that is harsh inside our heads. That is a majorly implicated in depression and anxiety. And so when we are practicing compassion, we can switch off that internal rumination and negative evaluation, and it reduces anxiety and depression. Compassion practice also shifts us into a state of emotional regulation. So these functional MRI studies show that when we practice self-compassion, we're activating parts of the brain that are involved in our emotional awareness and emotional regulation, but also down-regulating the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that is our threat signal center and that is responsible for all the negative emotions like anxiety and fear and depression. And alongside that, building resilience and our ability to cope with things emotionally, coping with pain, with stress, with feelings of failure. People who practice self-compassion have greater resilience and better ability to cope with things. And long-term mental health gains, so reduction of PTSD, social anxiety, a burnout, and general improved mental well-being through practicing compassion. So we talked there a little bit, we've moved now a little bit from talking about compassion generally to self-compassion, and how implementing self-compassion is so beneficial for us. And self-compassion is acknowledging our own suffering, recognizing that we have suffering, not pushing it away, not fighting it, not trying to pretend it's not there, not wanting it to go away, just acknowledging that we are experiencing difficulty, and that's okay. It's okay to say that. It's okay to acknowledge that this is really tough and we're suffering, and then taking action to support ourselves. So we're not getting stuck in that distress of this is awful, and we just collapse into this is awful. We recognize that this is awful, but then we take action. So we're then into that compassion rather than just self-empathy. And a lot of self-compassion, really, when you boil it down, it's offering ourselves the same compassion that we would give to somebody else. It's acknowledging that we are worthy of the same level of care and comfort and kindness and empathy and compassion as anybody else. So speaking to ourselves as we would do to a loved one, And that is basically the bottom line. That is the practice in practical terms of how you are kind to yourself, how you practice self-compassion is giving yourself what you believe other people deserve, but we're very bad at giving it to ourselves. But we can learn to do that through the practice of self-compassion. And this is an enormously empowering understanding. And this is how self-compassion in particular fosters this resilience and emotional resourcefulness within ourselves and enables us to cope better with life's difficulties, because we're no longer reliant on somebody else around us to give us what we need, to take care of us, to say kind things to us, to give us the care and the compassion and the kindness that we need. Sometimes there is nobody. We all know, particularly with chronic illness, our friends and relatives can sometimes not understand. We may find ourselves in a situation where there isn't somebody who can say the right thing to us. And that's okay, because we can say it to ourselves. And the studies are clear that our bodies respond in the same way. So we get the same benefit. Our brains release oxytocin. They change the parts of our brains that are more helpful, light up, and the parts of our brains like the amygdala that fuel negative emotions and distress calm down in response to self-compassion, in the same way as they would do if somebody else were comforting you. We can't tell the difference. So we can give ourselves the comfort and the soothing and the calming and the regulation that we need when we're experiencing difficulty. And at the same time, when we're doing that, we're rewiring our neural pathways so that we can cope better with difficulty, because we're not firing that second arrow into ourselves. We're only having to cope with the first difficulty and not all of the additional shame and distress and guilt and embarrassment and frustration and anger that we might turn on ourselves. We don't have to deal with that because we're not firing that second arrow. We're giving ourselves comfort and compassion and kindness, and that helps us to deal with suffering better. So, as I said, when we experience illness and suffering, the kind of default mechanism for us in our society, in the Western world, is that we turn inwards on ourselves and we begin to blame ourselves, and we find that inner critic switches on, and we get lots of self-criticism, lots of shame and blame going on. We get frustrated with ourselves, we get angry with ourselves, we think, why can't you do this? Why is this happening to me? This shouldn't be happening to me. It's all my fault. If only I hadn't done this or that or the other. And we feel worthless, and we feel our self-esteem goes down, and we get stuck in this negative self-talk and this self-blame, and we cut ourselves off from other people as well. When we're in that state, we push people away, even if there are people around us who are trying to help. We push them away. We think, I don't deserve this help. I brought this on myself, or I'm a bad person, or I'm, not coping, or whatever self-talk we have. We end up isolating ourselves as part of our suffering. And the antidote to that is self-compassion, is instead of slipping down that slippery slope of beating ourselves up and saying unkind things to ourselves and becoming bitter and angry and frustrated with ourselves, we use the practice of self-compassion to reconnect with ourselves, to acknowledge our experience, to offer ourselves comfort, to release oxytocin and good chemicals, to trip ourselves into parasympathetic state. It rewires our brains so we can be more resourceful and be more calm. And it also enables us to reconnect with other people and stay connected with other people. And so self-compassion is the antidote to that inner critic. And Kristen Neff is a researcher who has done a lot of amazing studies into compassion. And if you're interested in compassion and self-compassion, I highly recommend that you look her up and read her papers and watch her videos. There's a link there to a YouTube video where she talks through her self-compassion practice that she has created. And according to her, a way of practicing self-compassion, because it's a bit of a nebulous concept, isn't it? We say, oh, self-compassion, just practice self-compassion. And it's a bit like, oh, how do I do that in the moment? I'm stuck in this distressing situation. What do I do? I just go, well, they're there. How do I practice self-compassion? But she has come up with this structured process that we can take ourselves through in moments of distress, which she's done studies on that show it helps us in all of those ways that we've just talked about to stay connected with a sense of compassion with ourselves. So the three elements of self-compassion are starting off with kindness towards ourselves and acknowledging that there's difficulty. So we instead of judging and criticizing, we give ourselves kindness. We recognize that we are part of humanity. So this antidote to becoming isolated in our suffering is to recognize the concept that we are part of humanity because we suffer. Everybody suffers, and the fact that we're suffering means that we are the same as everybody else in that sense. And so we remain connected with others, and we become mindful of the suffering. We acknowledge it rather than becoming lost in it and stuck in it. We just acknowledge the fact that we are experiencing difficulty. And there's a YouTube video there that shows her going through this process. So the process is acknowledging the suffering, feeling a sense of connection with other people, and offering ourselves kindness. And I'm going to invite you now to join me in doing a very short little practice. If it feels okay, you don't have to, this is an optional part, but if you want to, we can join together and do what Kristen Neff calls the self-compassion break, which you can do at any time. It's a really short practice. And once you've got those three elements, you can offer yourself this self-compassion process in any moment of difficulty. So if you want to join in with me now, you can do this with your eyes open or closed. It's entirely up to you. If it feels okay, you can close your eyes, but you can also just soften your gaze and just let your eyes, become unfocused on something in front of you or down in front of you. And to begin with, in order to do this practice, we can bring to mind a minor difficulty in our lives. So the first time we do this, we don't want to go for the £300 difficulty. We want to find a £10 difficulty, something that has caused us a minor annoyance, a mild amount of distress. Maybe in the last week or so, a situation that has annoyed you, or something that's caused you some irritation or frustration or some distress of some kind. Just bring that experience, just bring that to mind for the next few moments, if it feels okay to do that. And once you've got that memory and you've connected into that, see if you can elicit some of those feelings, not too strongly, keeping yourself safe within your window of safety, just touching in to some of those feelings, if that's okay, and just notice how you feel. Is it anger, frustrated, distressed, sad? Just notice those feelings and just notice where you feel them in your body. Just connect into your physical sense of the feeling in your body. And to start with, we're going to just say to ourselves, this is a moment of suffering. So we're just bringing that mindful awareness to the fact that you are experiencing distress. And you can say a range of different words, whatever feels right for you. This is difficult. This is distressing. I'm finding this really hard. This is really tough. I'm experiencing suffering. We're just acknowledging it. We're not fighting it. We're not pushing it away. We're not hiding from it or pretending it doesn't exist. We're just saying, this is what it feels like to suffer. I am feeling distressed in this moment. And then in the second part of the process, we're connecting into that sense of being connected to humanity. Suffering is a part of life. It's a normal part of life for everybody. Everybody suffers. Everybody experiences distress in some way. And there's different flavors of distress and different intensities, of course, but ultimately, everybody experiences suffering. And you are part of humanity, connected to every single other person in the world through the fact that you are also experiencing suffering. And in that sense, you are not alone. And you can say to yourself, I am not alone. And any other words that feel good and right for you. Other people suffer. We all struggle. I am not alone. And then the final part, and you might want to place your hand or your hands on your chest, on your heart, if that's comfortable and accessible for you and if it feels right, or you can rest your hands on any other part of your body that you can reach comfortably and just offer yourself that sense of comfort that you would offer to somebody else. We instinctively reach out to people and offer them comforting touch. And you can offer that to yourself as well, if that feels okay. And as you do that, you can offer yourself some words of kindness. May I be kind to myself. Maybe asking yourself, what do I need to hear right now? What's the kindest thing that I can say to myself? What would help me with this suffering? Just ask yourself that question. And we're not criticizing or judging ourselves or beating ourselves up here. We're just saying, what do I need? How can I be kind to myself whilst I'm suffering? And if you find that hard, and many people do, maybe think of what you would say to a loved one who was suffering. What words of kindness would you offer to them if they were distressed, if they were experiencing this difficulty? What would you instinctively want to say to them? Maybe it's okay. It isn't your fault. You can do this. It's going to be okay. Whatever words feel right for you in your particular circumstance. Offer yourself some words of kindness. May I give myself the compassion that I need. May I accept myself as I am. May I forgive myself if that feels relevant. May I be strong. May I be patient with myself. May I give myself what I need right now. And then whenever you're ready, you can bring yourself back from that practice. If you've had your eyes closed, you can slowly and gently come back and open your eyes again. There's no hurry. Just take a few moments. Maybe take some nice deep breaths. And maybe just reflect on how you found that practice, what you noticed during those 3 different sections, whether one of them felt more helpful or whether all of them did. How did you find that? How did those words land for you? If you want to, you can share it in the chat. You don't have to. But just reflect for yourself on how that felt and maybe how it changed the feelings that you had to begin with about the difficulty that you were experiencing. Did you notice any shift, any change, any lessening of the difficulty? And you might not, and that's okay too, because this practice is a practice. It takes time, and it's not always easy to offer ourselves compassion and to respond to that compassion. So part of the process of being compassionate with ourselves is being compassionate to ourselves when we're practicing compassion and acknowledging that sometimes it didn't land and it's not working and it feels difficult, and that's okay too. But just reflect for your benefit on whether that was helpful. And if it was, maybe you will want to remember this 3-step process and try it out next time you encounter a difficulty. See if offering yourself compassion in this structured way helps and makes any difference. So we've talked about self-compassion and the way that it helps us, and it does foster a sense of healing within our body. It does help our bodies to function as well as they can when we're poorly. We've already talked about the fact that it improves our mental state and reduces that self-criticism. And when we're beating ourselves up and we are stuck in that amygdala, part of the amygdala's function is about pain perception and symptom perception, and particularly how distressing pain and symptoms feel. So anything that we can do, like that practice in the moment, that calms our amygdala down can reduce the perception of how distressing our symptoms and our pain can be. And as we've said, it enables us to take care of ourselves in the moment and build that resilience when things are difficult. We have a tool that helps us to cope with them. It doesn't mean that the difficulty goes away. It doesn't mean that suffering disappears. That's not what this is about. It's about recognizing that suffering happens, but helping us to cope with that suffering in a more positive and more constructive and more helpful way that is better for us. And it fosters a relationship with ourselves, a better relationship with us and our bodies, instead of that criticism, that internal damning voice that says, oh, I'm so cross with myself, I'm so cross with my body, I wish this wasn't happening. We can speak kindly to ourselves. We can give ourselves kindness and compassion. Our bodies respond to that. They really do. Our nervous system responds to that, and it helps us to feel better and switches us into rest and digest, which is where our body does its cellular repair, its detoxing, and our food gets absorbed and the nutrients can get where they need to be, and we're breathing more deeply and oxygen is circulating around our body. That's got to help us physically to feel better than being stuck in the hating and shaming and flighting and fighting state that we can be in when we're stuck in suffering and in self-criticism. And as I said, we're releasing that oxytocin, we're releasing endorphins, we're releasing all sorts of good, helpful chemicals that help us to feel better physically. But self-compassion is hard, and there are lots of things that stop us from practicing self-compassion. And there's a huge list. We could be here all night talking about them, but some of them are: we lack confidence. Other people's words carry more weight than ours. If we say to ourselves, oh, you're going to be all right, it doesn't carry as much weight. We don't have the same confidence in ourselves as we do in other people. So that stops us from being able to take care of ourselves and practice this. And we feel that we can't, when in fact we actually can, because our bodies respond and can't tell the difference. So we can be confident in our own ability to offer ourselves compassion. And our compassion is just as good as somebody else's compassion. But that can be a block. It can be a barrier to us doing this. We can feel shameful. We can feel that we don't deserve it. We don't have any self-worth. All that self-judgment and self-criticism gets in the way and stops us. And we try and do it. And we say to ourselves, I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to be kind to myself. And that little voice goes, oh, you don't deserve anybody to be kind to you. There's that internal conflict and criticism that we need to watch out for and to overcome. And a lot of that is through conditioning from other people that we've internalized, that society has gifted to us this negative self-image that we're not good enough, that we're not deserving, that we are not achieving certain things, and so we therefore don't deserve to be kind to ourselves. And we have a low self-image and low self-esteem as a result of that. And there's a lot of myths about self-compassion. People think of it as weak, as self-indulgent, that it's just wallowing in self-pity, that it's laziness, that we're just giving up. And none of that is true. Self-compassion is not any of those things. Self-compassion is healthy. It is a good and necessary part of looking after ourselves as adults that we're not taught about, but that for our emotional well-being is essential. Everybody should be doing this for themselves as an adult, because as children, we, in theory, hopefully, get our comfort and support from the carers that are around us, the adults who are supposed to be caring for us. That doesn't always happen, but hopefully there is somebody around a child who does that comforting, soothing role. As adults, we do that for ourselves, and we should and we can do that for ourselves and give ourselves the love and support and comfort that we deserve, that we are entitled to. And as a result of that, we can regulate our own emotional state. We can meet our own emotional needs, so we are feeling better emotionally, and it improves our mental well-being. It increases our resilience and our strength. If you imagine, if you are experiencing a difficulty, how much better you cope with that if you're saying to yourself, oh, it's okay, this is tough, this is really hard, but we're going to get through this, we're going to be okay, and you can do this, and I believe in you, and it's going to be okay. How much more resilience that gives you, how much more capacity you have to cope, than if you're saying, oh, this is awful and I'm just useless and I'm just never going to get through this and I'm hopeless, and beat ourselves up. Our resilience shrinks and we collapse when we do that to ourselves, just as we would if there was somebody else saying that to us. And as I've said, it promotes that healing state in the body, which can only be a good thing for us physically, to help our bodies to be as well as they possibly can with illness. So some ideas I'm going to leave you with how to practice self-compassion. And we've already looked at one. There's Kristen Neff's exercise of that self-compassion break, where we do that 3-step process of acknowledging, recognizing the suffering, sensing a connection to other people, that we're not alone in it, and then giving ourselves words of kindness and compassion and giving ourselves what we need in the moment. Doing mindful self-talk during flares and difficulties, and when we have episodes of distress, we need to be mindful of our self-talk and give ourselves good, helpful words and not those negative, unhelpful words. Journaling practices, writing things down is always helpful, and for some people more so than others. So if that's your thing, definitely writing it down, thinking about journaling on how would I speak to a friend, a loved one. One of my clients thinks about how she would talk to her daughter, and she would never speak to her daughter how she speaks to herself, of course. So now she started to speak to herself how she would speak to her daughter. Think about the words in advance, what you would say to someone in distress, and plan what you would say. Write it out in your journal. Write about how you are entitled and equally deserving of those kind words. Body scan meditations with a compassionate intention, so we can tune into our bodies and move through our bodies in our mind, maybe starting at the feet and into the ankles and the calves and the knees, and do that with the intention of offering compassion and love to our bodies. Might be difficult, it might feel tough to begin with, but it's interesting to explore that. If you can't do the whole body, is there one part of your body that you can spend some time sitting with and offering it compassion and kindness? Setting boundaries in our lives without guilt. So that's an act of self-compassion, recognizing what we need. And remember, it's all about taking action. So part of the action step is recognizing what we need and setting those boundaries without feeling guilty. So if we can't go to a social event that our family wants us to go to because we know it's not going to help us, we can set that boundary and say, I can't go at the moment, I'm afraid, because I'm not well. And that's okay. That's an act of self-compassion, and we can practice that. Visualizations and affirmations that are about being kind to ourselves. So we can practice visualizing ourselves in those situations, speaking up for ourselves, saying what we need to say. Imagine ourselves in situations where we feel supported and loved and connected. That all bolsters our resilience. The phrase, I am good enough as I am, that is an affirmation in its own right, and we can practice saying that over and over again, because when we practice affirmations, it rewires our neural pathways. So if those words don't feel good for you and they don't work for you, then find something else that does. Find some words that do land and repeat it. Something positive about yourself. I'm doing my best. I'm trying the best I can. I am the best version of myself that I can be today. Say those words to yourself. And what we're doing there is, instead of hearing the negative words and the criticism over and over again, which becomes then habitual, and that's the path in our brain that activates most regularly, we're creating a new pathway which activates, I'm a good person and I'm worthy of kindness. And I'm equally worthy of compassion to everybody else. And I'm good enough. I'm as good as everybody else. And that then becomes a pathway that has been worn into our brain. So then it becomes easier and more of a habit to say those things to ourselves. So find some words of self-compassion and offer them to yourself regularly. And it is a practice. It's hard to begin with, particularly if this is new to you and you're not used to giving yourself compassion because of all those myths about it and all that negative societal pressure that we experience. It's tough to go against that. It feels awkward to begin with. It feels like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. We don't deserve it. It doesn't feel right. And that is recognizing that that's where that's coming from, recognizing that that's not true. It's just how we have been brainwashed, if you like, beginning to spot that and deliberately choosing to practice this. And the more we practice it, even in tiny, tiny ways, if it feels too much to begin with, do one little thing, do one little part of the self-compassion practice, say one compassion focused affirmation to yourself once a day. Do a little tiny thing and build up gradually and practice, because it becomes easier the more we do it. So compassion is not passive. Remember, it's about action. So we're not just collapsing into the suffering and saying, oh, I'm suffering and I can't help it, and oh, this, it's all horrible. We recognize that we're suffering. We give ourselves that empathy, we give ourselves that acknowledgement, and then we can take better action for ourselves. Because when we experience suffering, there's sometimes a desire to fix it immediately. Of course, there is. We want to get out of it, we want it to stop. So we rush into problem solving mode whilst we're panicking, and we ruminate and we worry and we get stuck in this headspace of panicking to fix a problem, which can lead us to make mistakes, make bad choices, to do the wrong thing. If we step back for a moment and give ourselves that compassion and acknowledge, oh dear, this is really hard. I'm really struggling with this. Just going to sit for a moment and maybe connect with a sense of being part of a community. I'm not on my own. And I'm going to give myself some words of kindness, give myself what I need, listen to what I need. We connect with our inner resources and our inner wisdom and knowledge, and we can then come at the problem from a much more resourced place. So we can fix the problem potentially, or deal with it, or take some action towards making ourselves more comfortable or helping ourselves through a flare. We take better action as a result of spending this time being compassionate to ourselves first, and then taking some action. So finally, I just wanted to tell you about a case study that I experienced with one of my clients. And this lady had a lot of breathing difficulties and weight issues, and she had long COVID and COPD, and she had a lot of mobility issues and breathlessness that really impaired her ability to function. And one of her biggest problems was struggling to climb the stairs at night to go to bed. And she would fight her way up to the top of the stairs, gasping and wheezing, with several breaks. And then at the top of the stairs, she would collapse in a heap and berate herself every night with, what a silly expletive you are. You're an awful person. How could you let this happen? What a terrible person you are. What a useless person I am. And she would beat herself up and feel so angry with herself every night because she couldn't get to the top of the stairs without being out of breath and without having several breaks. And she was really, really unkind to herself every night. And when she told me about this, I taught her about self-compassion, and I suggested that when she did this at night, she got to the top of the stairs, instead of beating herself up and being unkind to herself, she could try taking a moment to say something kind to herself, to say, well done, you've done really well there. That was really tough, but you got there, and you've got this, and you're doing okay. And you are, you're worthy, you're amazing, you're doing incredibly well. And all I was really hoping for, was that she would be just a little bit less unkind to herself. That was all I was hoping for. But she came back the following weeks to tell me that when she started practicing this, she noticed that she was recovering much more quickly, and she wasn't as breathless. And it didn't take her as long to recover from struggling up the stairs as it had done before. And she actually felt that there was a noticeable physical improvement in her ability to get up the stairs and be less breathless and recover more quickly, which I found amazing. But it just goes to show that practicing self-compassion in action actually does have real benefits. It's not just some nebulous thing where we just, being nice to ourselves. It's actually changing the way our bodies are working, and can actually give us real benefits to our health, which I think is really, really important. So that's the end of the talk. That's how you can contact me if you have any questions or anything you want to ask. But I'm going to stop my screen share now, and I'm going to take some questions. I think I've got a few minutes. We can take some questions. I can't see you still. I don't know why, but I'm just looking in the chat. So if you want to put any questions in the chat, or you can unmute and just shout them out to me, and I will know that you're there. Oh, that's interesting. So I'm just reading in the chat. Joy, to you was saying that shift in perspective that others suffer as well. Yes, it can be really powerful because it does counter that sense when we suffer, we have that why me. That's really natural. And we think nobody else suffers like this. Why is this happening to me? Why have I been singled out for this terrible experience? And that makes us feel even worse and makes the suffering even more extreme. So having that sense of, actually, this is really normal. Everybody suffers. We're all connected because we suffer. It's a human thing to suffer. It changes that internal narrative of I'm somehow being punished because I somehow deserve this, is kind of that narrative that goes on in our heads. And actually, that is not the case at all. Everybody suffers. We're all connected. And it can be really powerful to connect into that. Oh, I'm just reading some of the other comments here. Yes, the story. I know it really moved me actually, because as I said, I just wanted her to be kinder to herself. I wasn't expecting her to say that it actually changed her physical experience, but it did, which was a lesson for me as well, part of my own learning. Absolutely. Yeah. And it does, when we experience or when we witness suffering, it does trigger our own trauma. It does trigger our own emotional parts of our brain light up, and we feel our pain that resonates with their pain, and that is empathy. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it is human to be able to have that capacity to share someone's pain. But if we then get stuck in that place and we don't then turn it into some kind of action, even if that action is just wishing that person well, and that's something that I haven't mentioned, but in self-compassion practice, sometimes there is nothing we can do to fix the suffering that people are experiencing, but we can wish them well. And that act of feeling as though we have sent them love and compassion and a wish for their lives to improve, that also changes the neural pathways and the different parts of our brain, so that we don't get stuck in that empathy drain, in that trauma part of our brain, because we feel as though we have done something. And depending on your point of view and on your religious belief and your spiritual belief, some people believe it does have an impact to send good wishes out into the world. And it would be nice to believe that in some small way we can affect things by doing that. But even just by imagining doing that, we're protecting ourselves from the distress that we feel. So, Val, yes, yeah, I think you recognize what we've been talking about, and it is a universal experience. We all go through this, particularly when we live with illness and pain. Suffering is tough, and we all experience these difficult emotions. And so, yeah, practicing this, it is a practice, and it is tough. It is hard to do, and hard to shake off those old entrenched ideas that you've just got to be brave and suck it up and don't complain, don't moan, don't acknowledge the suffering, just pretend it's not there. It's very deeply ingrained because we've been doing it all our lives. So this is a process. It's about just very gently starting to explore how you can use compassion to help you. And if you find yourself in a moment of difficulty thinking, oh my God, why am I so useless? Why is this happening to me? See if you can just catch that and go, ah, let's do this other thing instead. Let's say to myself, gosh, this is really hard. Wow, I'm really suffering right now, and that's really tough, but I'm okay. I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to get through it. What do I need right now? How can I be kind to myself? And see how that changes the narrative that's going on and how you feel in the moment. Explore and practice and see. Yeah, absolutely, Joyty. Yes, well done to yourselves, because everything that you're coping with, everything that you're doing on a day-to-day basis to help yourself with illness, it's tough. Every day that we get through with MCAS and our health conditions is tough. And we need to give ourselves more credit for that. And yes, give ourselves a bit of a hug and say, well done. You are doing amazingly well. And that is powerful. It really does release oxytocin and dopamine and all sorts of good chemicals, which is far better for us than being stuck in releasing cortisol and adrenaline and which is what we get when we're fighting and we're angry with ourselves. And yes, writing it down in a gratitude journal, it's lovely to do that. Yeah. Yeah, you've achieved loads, but you've not said well done to yourself. But you would say it to someone else. You'd immediately say to someone else, wow, that's amazing. You've done really well. But we forget to say those kind things to ourselves. So yeah, just practicing. It's not something to beat ourselves up with. That's something else to be careful of, that this doesn't become another stick for our brains, our clever brains, to find another way to criticize ourselves by telling ourselves we're not compassionate enough. That can happen. So we're just exploring this. There's no right or wrong. It doesn't have to be a particular way. It's just being kind to yourself in whatever way feels right and good for you in the moment. And the more we can do that and reflect on it afterwards, and sometimes we miss the opportunity in the moment. The suffering is extreme and we're feeling so distressed, we miss it. It's hard to do in the moment, but then we reflect afterwards and we realize maybe it would have helped me more if I'd not done that criticism, and maybe if I'd done a bit of kindness. That's not a failing, that's a learning. That's, that is compassion in retrospect. So then we learn and we reflect and maybe journal on it, write it down, say what you would have done differently next time, not beating yourself up, but writing down and thinking, how could I have dealt with that better? What would have helped me more? What kind things could I say to myself in future when that happens again? If that happens, what will I do differently? And then that helps us in the moment to remember that and to get the diary out and remind ourselves what to say and how to help ourselves. It's a huge learning curve. It's an enormous lifelong practice of learning to be kind to ourselves. That is never finished, but we can do what we can and help ourselves as much as we can in the moment. So I really hope that that's been helpful and useful and interesting. Oh, a well done journal. I love that. Yes. Well, if you like writing, yes, it's good. But some people, if writing's not your thing, then maybe think of another way, a picture, a visual representation of well done, or just a treat, giving yourself something nice, that you can do for yourself, like allowing yourself something that, is nice, that brings you comfort or pleasure or joy. So yes, find ways to recognize your well done moments and give yourself those words of kindness. Yeah. So yeah, I really hope it's been helpful and useful. It's been lovely to have your company. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it all. And yeah, I'll see you again at another talk. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Take care now. Bye-bye.